Thank you, Dr. Green, and good morning, everyone. Vice Chancellor, Dr. Singh. Uh, Thank you very much for the opportunity for us to bring this issue up to the fore. We think that it's time that there is public discussion on an issue that basically is so important, not only to Guyana, but the wider Caribbean and to the globe. I would like to frame what I'm going to say on the, I'll set the context by first to consider what I might call three facts that we must face. The first, the Paris Agreement, which calls for global effort to restrict warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and that by the end of the century. The reality is the recent science has shown that on the path we are on now, business as usual with the emissions, we are likely to get 1.5 in the mid of the next decade. That is not at the end of the century. The message the science tells us is that we do not have time. Time is running out, and it calls for urgent action to mitigate. That is for countries to pull out their, reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So time is one factor that we must consider. The next thing, the agreement also spoke to resources to help countries to both mitigate, that is to look at the energy issue, but more importantly for us as small developing countries which have not basically impacted significantly on the greenhouse gas global budget, for us to build climate resilience, that is to adapt. Since 2009, at the COP meeting in Cancun, the global community spoke about getting a fund under the Green Climate Fund up to about 100 billion per year by 2020. We haven't seen anything like that on the table as yet. This is 11 years, more than 11 years afterwards. So resources are not available, and the few resources that are available, developing countries have had a very difficult time getting access to those resources. So those are two issues, time and resources. And very germane to our discussion is the fact that transition to zero carbon sort of state that we are all aspiring to, that transition takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. And the most recent assessment is that as we transition to a zero carbon world, 60% of the energy that the world would require would be supplied by fossil fuel in 2040, which means fossil fuels are going to be part of the energy equation for a long time to come. There's no magic bullet that you shut off production today and we are into a zero carbon world. So I need you to keep these three things in mind. So let's look at Guyana's situation. We've started production, and that's a reality. From a morals point and environmental perspective, the best option really is to keep the oil in the ground. But if we do that as a poor developing country, given the time restriction, the need for accelerated action on our part, both for mitigation and adaptation, where are we going to get the resources from for that transformation? That's a question we need to ask. So there is an option. We're talking, if we're keeping the oil in the ground, we're contributing to a global public good. And we would expect that the international community would be able to pay us to keep the oil in the ground. This is basically similar to the forest arrangements, REDD+, and the agreement we have with Norway, keeping our carbon sink forests in a certain state, and we are paid for that. We are paid for contributing to a global public good. And mind you, Norway is able to provide us with those resources because of the wealth that they have been generating from oil. And very recently, the Norwegian Minister of Energy more or less disclosed that fossil fuels will be very much a part of their equation as they move to zero carbon status. So that's the first point I want to make. What is the alternative for us? I think it is important that the wealth generated from exploitation of our oil and gas resources there should be a priority basically to utilize that for us to move to zero carbon status, transforming the energy sector to total renewables, and also simultaneously to build resilience across our agricultural sector, across our health sector, across the water sector, basically looking at protecting our low-lying coasts from sea level rise, etc. We are experiencing all of these impacts at this point in time. May I say that resources are critical. One of our main constraints in the Caribbean is that in developing countries, we don't have the resources to implement. If you look at a country like Holland, just like Guyana, with low-lying coasts, they have the resources to put in place a 1 in 1,000 flood control system for a 1 in 1,000 year event. We in poor developing countries could hardly put in place the sort of arrangements we need for yearly flood events. So the resources are critical. And here is an opportunity to access resources and for expeditious implementation of not only the mitigation side of the coin, but the adaptation side of the coin. The other issue here is that as we have been preparing all sorts of documents. We have our green growth development strategy. We have the LCDS, etc. We have written national communications for the convention. We have national adaptation plans. And most recently, the NDCs, nationally determined contributions, which of course, we are going to present a revised one at the forthcoming COP. Now, all of these basically, at this point in time, are expressions of intent. We need to move to implementation. And for implementation, these documents need to be transformed into a portfolio of implementable projects. Guyana has moved significantly in that direction with the LCDS, where they had a study done looking at the implementation, a strategy for the implementation of the actions under the LCDS. They have prioritized some actions and they are costed. let us move with both mitigation, transforming the energy sector, and with implementation of climate resilience building actions across the country. This would how those resources should be utilized. Now, I have very limited time, and just to move from Guyana for a short while, what about the wider Caribbean? All of the countries in the Caribbean are committed to zero carbon growth, to transforming the energy sector. All of them basically have adaptation plans, but they face the same restrictions as we do. They don't have the resources for implementation. And as I said, we are quickly running out of time when we could take effective action to deal with the risk that climate change imposes on our region. How about looking at a nexus of Suriname, Guyana, Trinidad, and Tobago? Basically, using the oil resources that we have between Guyana and Suriname and Trinidad and Tobago, including the infrastructure in Trinidad and Tobago, and internalizing the supply of fossil fuel until such time that it's phased out. As I said, fossil fuel will have to be part of the equation as we move forward to zero carbon growth. If you look at what's happening with fossil fuel prices at this point in time, with the distortions in the market, you could understand the pressure that it would be on all countries bringing in fossil fuel from the international market. The Petro-Carib issue, that's as a result of the Venezuelan situation, is no longer available. So let's have a Petro-CARICOM umbrella that would do that. And it doesn't stop there. We could use the gas resources, for instance, and Trinidad's infrastructure to address the fertilizer need for the implementation of the JAGDIO initiative, which looks at Guyana, Suriname, and Belize being the breadbasket of the Caribbean. So we can provide a platform to provide the resources for the transformation of the Caribbean into a zero carbon status, and also at the same time to build climate resilience across the Caribbean so that we are more or less protected from climate impacts, climate change impacts now and in the future. I think the opportunity is there. And in doing that, we accelerate the rate at which we more or less get this transformation in the Caribbean. So time, resources, and the fact that regardless of what we do, by 2040, as they are now saying, 60% of the energy being utilized globally would be supplied by fossil. And one last point, there is a proposal, a discussion starting to get some visibility at this point in time. Why not have, OPEC always has been sitting down and talking about production, etc. Why not look at the producers at this point in time and come to a global agreement on an allocation of production caps for all of the different producers, so that no one basically would, with resources, would be left out of the equation. But together, we say that, look, by 2040, this is the limit of supply. We allocate the distribution to A, B, C, D, etc. This is just this is an idea that needs quite a lot of work. It can be done, but why not let us look at an international agreement on the who produces and how much over the next couple of decades. So I feel that there is an opportunity that wisely use the oil and gas resources now being discovered in the Southern Caribbean could be utilized to accelerate the pace at which we achieve zero carbon growth and climate resilient Caribbean societies. Thank you.